Hello, everyone, and welcome to Adobe Live. My name is Anna McNaught, and today I am joined by a very talented photographer, Daniel Livingstone. Daniel, how are you doing today? Welcome to Adobe Live.
Hello, thank you guys for having me. I'm super excited for this opportunity and to be able to share just some of my tips and tricks with y'all.
Of course. Yeah, I'm so excited to have you here. Your work is absolutely stunning. And I know we're going to be learning a lot today. So I hope you all are very excited. Welcome everyone into the chat. Nice to see you all here. Welcome everyone on Behance and YouTube. Hope you all are having a wonderful day so far and are excited to learn some photography things. So just a few housekeeping tips real quick. Be sure to start your day with our curated section of Photoshop Daily Creative Challenge every weekday at 9 a.m. Pacific this week. Tune in and challenge yourself to a new prompt each day. So that's super fun if you want to just kind of brush up on your Photoshop skills. But today we are going to be working in Lightroom and Photoshop. So hi, Paul. Hi, General Kenobi. Hi, Frank. Nice to see you all here. Daniel, I won't waste any more time because I know you have a very exciting video to show us, and I'll just cue it over to you.
Yeah, so when Adobe contacted me saying like, oh, you need to put together a little intro about yourself, like you could show some pictures, you could show like a reel. I kind of wanted to put all that stuff together and really like encapsulate all of the work that I've done here on Behance so far since I've been streaming. So I just whipped together a little compilation intro video for y'all.
Awesome. Yeah, let's check it out.
Hello, everyone. My name is Daniel Livingstone, and today, we're streaming on Adobe Live. All right, let's make this quick. I'm from Chicago, Illinois. I shoot photos and videos. I also do a lot of editing. And sometimes I stream it all. I think that covers it. Now let's get back to the stream.
Oh my God, so great. I love that you did that, and it's just amazing to see all of the cool things that you've done. So great job with that.
Thank you so much. I mean, this whole session has kind of inspired me to be a little reflective. So I've just been thinking back, like ever since I first started streaming on Behance 2 years ago, and I was like, what like really have I done since then? And apparently it's a lot. I mean, with the photo editing, the video editing, the streaming, we've even done a little bit of like graphic design at points. And I just love that streaming it pushed me and inspired me to do like so many new things with my work.
Yeah, that's really cool. So are you just streaming on your own channel?
Yes, I do have a Behance channel that I live stream and post projects on. It's just my name at Daniel Livingstone. And I first got into Behance because of their mood boarding. Honestly, I love their like mood boarding system. And then from there, I found projects, and then from there, I found live streaming, and here we are today.
Yeah, that's so amazing. I love it. Paul said that you win the contest for best intro.
Thank you.
And that's a huge compliment coming from Paul. He's like the king of Adobe. So that's awesome. Yeah, everyone's loving your intro. Very, very cool.
I mean, I'm not gonna lie, it was super fun to make. Like, I gave myself like I think like a week deadline to make it. So from start to finish, I was like, okay, planning, scripting, like idea, concepting, and then most of the assets are stuff that I've just have in the past. So like all my videos, all my photos, just throwing them into Premiere and making a quick little montage of all that stuff, doing all the voiceover like in Premiere with their like in-app recorder. And then I contacted a friend of mine who owns a drone, and I was like, hey, can we get a really cool drone shot? Like the inspiration was kind of like Jersey Shore style, like reality TV, late 2010s of like super fast, like talking slow into fast, like skyline shot. And
awesome.
It was just such a great experience making that, and I'm super happy with the way it came out.
Yeah, that's so great. Well, you've inspired me to create something, maybe inspired many of the rest of us to create something as well. So yeah, very cool. So yeah, what are we going to be working on today?
So today, what I normally do on stream is my post-processing workflow. As a photographer and just a creative in general, I work on a wide variety of genres, topics. So anything from commercial to lifestyle to fitness to events and activations. But today's stream is going to be a little more focused on commercial fitness editing, mostly my post process from a technical standpoint.
Cool.
So I have here in my catalog a photo shoot that I did recently with a personal friend of mine who is a bodybuilder and trainer here in Chicago. And it has a very editorial feel. We were going for more of like that gritty urban Nike look. So I took her to a parking garage located in the Loop downtown here in Chicago. And this is a pretty popular place to shoot. One, because it provides a open top space. You get a lot of natural light. But on top of that, it is one of the few locations that is technically outdoors that is in line with our above ground rail system. So you can get these really cool shots where you line up a human subject with an above ground train. I mean, normally like this is 3 stories up. So it's weird to kind of see this perspective if you're from Chicago.
Yeah, that's very cool.
So I have here a couple of selects that I've made. We'll be doing a couple things, going through the selects that I've previously made just so we can get right into editing pretty quickly. After that, I have so many more images from this shoot that we'll be covering over the next day and tomorrow. So I'll be showing you how to edit stuff first off, then going into how to quickly make selections as a photographer. Because when you're doing fitness photography, you're usually doing a lot of burst fire stuff. So shooting 15 frames a second or 30 frames over 2 seconds, and it's a lot of like quick jittery motion. You want to make sure you pick the right shot, but you also need to do it quickly. When you're doing a shoot for a couple hours, you end up with hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of images. So when you're delivering to a commercial client, you need to be really time efficient. So starting off with the first couple of images I have, we did some warm-ups, just some stretching poses, and I really was obsessed with this wall scene because if I zoom out a little bit, it's a really big wall and there were luckily no cars parked here. So I got to have this like surreal looking space where she's just by herself in isolation, but you can still get that like urban city feel. And when I shot these at 1000 ISO f5 1/200th. I just wanted to make sure that we didn't get any motion blur. We made sure our entire subject was in focus, and I needed to crank up the ISO to just allow enough light in because we were in the shade. So you can see here from our histogram that all of our information is pretty in the middle ground, which means we have all of the data. We just need to kind of expand it, stretch it out, and find our image within this. So the first thing I'm going to do here is pick up my exposure to make sure our image is bright enough that we can see all the detail and information. From there, I would normally pick up the contrast to make sure we're making it pop, but lately I've been experimenting with a new process where I actually bring the contrast down to get a little more detail in our darker and lighter areas, and then I will pick up the vibrance. And picking up the vibrance in conjunction with lowering the contrast really helps pull out a lot more color. And a lot of people don't necessarily know this from the technical side of editing, but increasing contrast actually makes you lose saturation. So typically people will edit and pump up the contrast a bunch, and they'll pump up the saturation a bunch. But the more contrast I pick up, we're actually losing a lot of color depth. Versus when I pull it down, you can see a lot more of the blues here, the greens here in the background, because luminance and saturation are pretty linked. And the reason that I use vibrance over saturation, I think vibrance just has like a more natural feel to it. It usually tries to go after images that are a little less saturated in your frame versus the saturation slider, which does a global adjustment. So saturation just kind of says all the colors need to go up. Whereas vibrance, it kind of says, let's give the ones that need a boost a little bit of an extra boost.
I totally agree with that. And that's really interesting that you bring the contrast down like that. I've been seeing that happening from a lot of creators lately, like kind of editing in this, I don't know if it's a new way, but it seems to be a little bit of a new trend, and it gives incredible results. It's very cool to see the difference.
So with the creative direction of this shoot, when I was pre-planning, I actually built a mood board on Behance using some other photographers in the platform's work as a reference for posing, style, color grading. And for a lot of these, I was really leaning into the idea of a very warm look. I wanted it to look like afternoon. I wanted to look kind of sunsetty, but not with that harsh lighting. So I'm going to increase the temperature here and really warm up that image and give it like a nice like sunset feel. And in addition to that, the tint is actually at a pretty good spot. There's not too much green or magenta color cast either way. If anything, if I'm going for that warm look, I'm going to increase the tint a little more towards magenta, because purple and yellow kind of work together to make an orange tint. And in the hue tab, I like to bring my yellows a little bit towards orange, just to give it that extra warmth. I'm also going to desaturate the yellows a little bit because I want to focus more on orange than yellow. I personally am not a huge fan of yellow as a color. More so reds and oranges are my vibe.
I'm with you.
And one tool that I've been really into with Lightroom lately is the new and improved color grading tab. So it used to be back in the day, if you're a like pre-2022 or 21 fan, this used to be the split toning tab, and you only got highlights and shadows. And then it would be a really basic slider of hue and saturation. But now we have these wonderful color wheels that include highlights, shadows, and midtones, along with blending and balance. So I like the way these work, where I can pick the hue, kind of drag my cursor up to the saturation. And then once that's set, it's pretty locked into that hue. And then I can just take the saturation on a slider up and down locked in there. So I think if I kick up more of that warmth in the highlights, it'll give me that very sunset look.
Nice.
And looking through to make it pop a little harder, a little color theory trick that I like to do is whatever my highlight color is, I will try to do the opposite with my shadows. So I'll put a little bit of blue, which is the natural complement, into the shadows, and you start to get a little more separation of her hair, her outfit to the background. And if I turn that off and on, you can see the difference it makes, where she still stands out, but the background is very warm, like I wanted in the first place.
Yeah, that looks really good.
To add to a little bit of our processing, I'll probably pick up the shadows a little bit. And since this is a black outfit, we actually don't need that much detail in it. It's a pretty flat and smooth surface. So I'm going to bring the shadows down to increase that contrast. And typically when I'm working on these basic lighting adjustments, I'm always keeping my eye up here on the histogram to see where our information is. This is a very like objective reference for where our picture is at. So looking at the image, you can eyeball most things as a visual artist, but I like to kind of bring in some of the mathematics and science into it and say like, well, we're very like high key. All of our detail is kind of in the highlights here, and we're not really getting a lot of detail of the shadows or information out of the shadows. So I can pull that down considerably and really make our blacks a true black. And if you're extra sensitive about these kinds of things, you can use these little triangle tools up here on the histogram as your warnings. So it'll say, hey, these areas in the blacks are getting a little clipped and you're kind of losing it. So I can pull those up a tad, just so we're losing as little information as possible. And then if I bring the shadows down, we can lower that without clipping too much still. Same goes for the highlights. If I turn this on and then brought the exposure way up, you'll see some red areas over here where I can see that the shoe is clipping, but we're not going to kick it up that high. I'm pretty sure we're at 1.75 here. So this is where our image is currently at. It's a little dark for my taste, so I do want it to pop. I'm going to take it up to about here, bring our shadows down, blacks down, and maybe even highlights down a little bit. And this is like basic adjustments. Anyone can do this, and already we're at such a great like editorial spot. Now, if I really wanted to add some extra spice to it, I would go into the effects tab here and I would put a little bit of a vignette on it just to keep our focus on the subject. And a photography like mindset thing that I have, and this is advice that I would give anyone who's a photographer, is we all know that photography is light painting, but you really want to be intentional with how you're painting the light. So I like vignettes because they really use light to draw a focus towards your subject. We're darkening the edges, which shifts your attention away from the edge of the frame into what you want to look at. People, when they're looking at a photograph, their eyes like to go to the brightest part of the image. So that's why people usually have lighting on their subjects if it's a portrait, where you want your eye to go right to that thing. So I'm going to bring the vignette in. I always do a pretty tight midpoint, near of maximum roundness, and a heavy feather, just so the vignette is as subtle as possible. And you can see here the difference between before and after is looks kind of flat. So you see her and the background's pretty just boring almost. Once you bring this in, you
Wow.
really get a sense of, dramaticism.
Yeah, what a huge difference there.
So with this being our reference image, I think this is pretty well treated in Lightroom. Is it cool if I take it into Photoshop and do a little bit of cleanup?
Yeah, that would be great.
So I will click edit in Photoshop right out of Lightroom's film strip. You can also do it from the top bar here. But once we get into Photoshop, this is treated the way I want it, which means the lighting is figured out, the contrast is figured out, and the color is figured out with a little bit of effects from the vignetting. Or if I want to add it a flare, I would do some like local masking. But I'll take it into Photoshop once that's ready and do a little bit of light retouching just on the cleanup. Now, this was a public outdoor space, so it's not like we had full control of the environment. So unfortunately, I didn't get to bring a broom and just sweep the whole parking garage. Oh, sorry, my camera should be back now. So I didn't get to sweep the whole parking garage, but we can always fix these things in Photoshop.
Quick question for you from the chat from Sean. Is Daniel worried about the leading lines pulling the viewers out of the frame?
So this was and that's a great question. This is a unique situation because this parking garage, the wall in the background is perfectly straight, and these lines here are true horizontals and verticals. The garage itself is slanted, so it kind of creates this weird distorted effect that I kind of like because it creates a little bit of interest. But we can definitely like make these horizontals and verticals like perfectly straight. And then I am going to decide after the fact whether I want these to match that. But we also have the option in Photoshop to straighten these out as well as these. For now, I'm going to do some quick cleanup. I like using the spot healing tool or the spot healing brush tool. And all these little nicks and marks on the garage floor, I will just brush over quickly. And I'm using a tablet with a stylus to make this a lot easier on me. If you don't own one of these, but you are into retouching, I would highly suggest getting one because it lets your cursor do much more natural brush strokes than with a mouse or a trackpad.
Yes, that is something that I desperately need. Which one do you recommend?
I have the Wacom Intuos BTS. Now, this is kind of a hot take for people who don't have tablets, but I prefer like smaller tablets. Like the smallest you can possibly give me, I'll take. And even with my already small tablet, I've mapped it to where I'm only using like even a quarter of that space for my cursor. Yeah, all my cursor movements are very like wrist controlled. I don't like moving my hand around the tablet that much. Most people prefer like larger tablets because it allows them a lot more precision, which makes sense because if you want to get like really detailed and like your pen pathing like this, you want to make sure it's precise. But for me, with my workflow, I usually just zoom in like a lot, maybe almost too much, but usually my screen's at like 200, 300% when I'm working on like really detailed retouching. So I'll just come in here and brush these out with the spot healing brush tool. And I will say Photoshop's AI technology has improved incredibly over the past couple of years. I mean, I remember when Content Aware first came out in like 2019, I want to say, around then. And I was a pretty early adopter because I was like, as a retoucher, any tool that's going to make my job faster is very welcome.
Yes.
And this kind of technology has always kind of been built in with the spot healing tool. But once like Content Aware came out and all those Adobe Sensei like integrations were more prevalent in a lot of Photoshop's tools, my workflow has increased like exponentially in terms of speed.
I agree. Are you ever worried as you're going around and retouching, like some of those areas that have that soft grain are getting a little blurry? Is that something that you fix after or don't worry about? How do you deal with that?
That's a good question. And I honestly have like that conversation with my colleagues and peers all the time.
Yeah.
I've really leaned into this concept of limit testing. So there is a point of good enough where, as an artist, you will always notice every single imperfection of what you do. But your audience will probably only notice like maybe a quarter, if that, maybe like 10 to 5% of those mistakes or things that you see as mistakes. Like
Right.
this little notch here, I can correct that. But if I zoomed all the way out, no one would ever notice it.
Right.
So it's all about like finding the tolerance that your audience has for those kinds of things. Like if I get rid of this and it comes a little soft, with the vignette kind of hiding that and the low level of detail in this area, people aren't really going to notice it as much. Everyone's eyes should be going here all the way down to here and then kind of working their way around the frame. But I really want people to be looking at this. So small imperfections in the cleanup here aren't that big of an issue for me.
And what about if this was for a client and they were, I don't know, maybe they were paying more attention to that?
Even in client, this concept still applies.
Okay.
Because you are the creative expert. You know, when a client hires you to work on something like this, they are trusting your professional opinion. So you have your tolerance, and they still, even as a client, have a less tolerance for than you do for these kinds of quote unquote mistakes.
That's a very good point.
Your knowledge of these things will usually far surpass theirs, and it's up to you to make a professional and executive decision on whether this is something that really detracts from the image or if it's a non-factor. And when it comes to these, I don't like using the term mistakes. When it comes to these kinds of blemishes, you really should be asking yourself, does this take away from the image? Is this too distracting? And if it is, that's when you would get rid of it. Like for example, this little piece here, this kind of falls in line with her. And if I want your eyes to go to her, they're going to travel down here. They will catch this, and this is distracting. So this is something that I would get rid of. And since it's so close to her, if I use the healing brush tool here and overlap with her leg a little bit, it might sample from her leg and you'll get these kinds of like AI imperfections. If it's something that's so precise and close to this, I will just go to the clone stamp tool and I will manually brush that in, especially because this is such a repeatable texture.
Cool.
And I really want to make sure that I'm keeping her edge sharp. So if I do a before and after, you'll see that that is gone, but we still retained the shape. And all the other distractions in the floor are very clean.
Yeah, that looks so good. Paul said, I wonder how you would match the texture through adding grain in some way. I had the same issues in Photoshop.
So prior to these AI solutions, everyone kind of had to do these things manually. So if those soft spots are a concern for you, I would not suggest using the spot healing brush tool. I would say more of a manual solution like the clone stamp tool is better because it gives you more control over what you're sampling. Like if I got a soft spot here, let's say I wanted to correct this dark area, but I really still wanted to keep the texture. With the depth of field being on a linear plane, you know, you're kind of getting a gradient of soft to sharp. Your sampling plane should be in line with that. So if I took a guide, you know, if I wanted to fix something that was here, this dark area, I would need to sample from all the stuff that falls in line with that. So I match the same level of depth of field and blur. So I will sample from along that line and I will just tap, 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 paint over there. Now that dark spot is gone, but we still have the same level of texture and grain. And you want to make sure that your opacity and flow are set to 100. So you're perfectly copying the exact texture of that.
Cool.
And another before and after. So I would say that all these things are distractions and they do take away from the image. So when I get rid of them, it continues to bring that focus back to the subject. And now the picture becomes a little more about shape and form and color. Because everything is so simplified, we've really minimized our image to just those elements.
Yeah, it looks so great.
I'm even gonna get rid of the shadow here because it is still a little distracting. And there you have it. So this image is pretty much ready to save right after I fix a couple small blemishes on the subject. But working with really great talent like my friend here, you really don't have to worry about that. The talent, good talent will save you a lot of time in post. People who are professional, people who come prepared, hair done, makeup done, skin looking great, will save you hours and hours of unnecessary retouching.
Absolutely.
And for the skin blemishes, if it's a quick fix like this, especially when the subject is so small in frame, I'll just use the spot healing tool. And you'll notice here we do get a little bit of like blurry areas from those AI elements, but we're zoomed in at 300, 200%. So when you zoom out, really not that noticeable, not a big deal. And I'm willing to bet that even a client won't notice something if it's at that scale.
Right.
So this image is pretty much ready to go. I'm going to save it into the correct folder. And my folder structure is really specific. So the way that I organize all my images, and if you really want to improve your workflow speed, organization is the first step to that. You know, it's really hard to work quickly when everything is a mess. So the way I do it is when I do a shoot, I'll upload all my pictures in my hard drive. They will go into a job folder, which has the name of the shoot. This one is called Adobe Livestream Fitness. So all of the raw images are within that project folder. Next to all of the raws is a subfolder called edited. So that's where all of my PSDs or my TIFFs go. Anything that I retouch will be separate from my raws, but still together collectively. And then within that edited folder is where all my exports go. So there's a layer to it of raw edited exports.
Cool. And do you organize those job folders by date?
I do. So beyond that, my organization system is the hard drive itself. Then beyond that, it is by year.
Okay.
And then beyond that, it is by season. So I know a lot of people like to divide theirs by months. But for me, just with my personal organization, seasons are easier for me to remember when I shot something because I live in Chicago. It's a 4-season city. I just try to remember what the weather was like when I shot it. So if there's snow on the ground, that's in the winter folder. If it was super hot, that's a summer folder. If it was kind of cold, spring. And if it was brown, autumn.
Yeah, that's really good because we organize by month, and sometimes it's kind of a pain because we'll have like one shoot in May and then like 10 shoots in June or something. And I'm like, I know it was in summer, but what month was it? And yeah, and then you end up really messy and you can't find what you're looking for. So that's a great tip.
Yeah, for me, like I considered doing months when I set up this operation, but it's like there are too many months.
Yeah.
And so little separation between them where it's like, what is really the difference in your head between April and May?
Right.
It's really hard to make those distinctions. So season gives me a much wider range of like, it's kind of like quarterly. It's like first quarter, second quarter. So it's like, it was hot out, probably summer. That gives me a wide range to get it right. And if not, it was spring, you know?
Yep. And then I noticed that you put underscore edited. Maybe a dumb question, but what's the reason for that?
So if I'm doing a subfolder in anything and it's important, I will put an underscore before it because I do all of my sorting by alphabetical order. An underscore is a symbol which comes before any alphabetical letter or number. So it will always put that folder at the very beginning.
Sweet.
And I can show you here in my Finder. If I go into our folder here, it has all of the raws, and then before that will be the edit folder.
Oh, okay. Awesome.
And I didn't get a chance to rename these RAWs, but also have a naming convention for RAW files. It's usually my initials underscore job name underscore 4-digit number. So this would, for example, would be like DL underscore Adobe underscore 0001. So the DL initial at the front of all my RAWs would definitely put the underscore edited folder at the very beginning.
Okay. Yeah. I'm always so curious how people organize their folders. And I feel like every time I gain a new little tip. So hopefully everyone watching has gained something from that as well.
I mean, as a retoucher, having all of these systems is what allows me to do my job. Because if people are hiring you solely for editing, they're expecting quality by default, but speed is what will really set you apart. Because I feel like a lot of people can edit the same way, and that's what they're expecting you to do. When other people hire me to edit for them, they're giving me a style to match, and there isn't a lot of creative input in that sense. So I am just replicating a style, and a lot of people can learn how to replicate a style. What will set you apart is how quickly you can do that, how efficiently you can do that.
Awesome. Love that.
So moving on between the next couple images from this shoot, I'm really looking for, and now that we've done this first shot, Lightroom allows me to very quickly batch edit stuff. So I can copy all the settings that I put on this first RAW and then select all the images that come after that were shot with the same settings and then just paste them on. So I can kind of preview when I'm selecting, which images really fit the look in an almost final state. So I can see all the next images here with the same color grading, same lighting adjustments. And I can just very quickly tab through and pick like which ones stand out to me. So between these two, I like this one because her body language is a little more powerful. Those shoulders are pushed back. She's looking up, which creates, importance. So I can take this down to a 4-star, and you'll notice that all my images currently are set to 5 stars. My selection style is either 0 or 5 on the first round. So it's either a yes or a no. And I'll select, every image that I just like or I think is usable. From there, I will filter out my 5 stars, go through all those, and then I will demote the 5 stars that I don't like or don't get chosen into 4 stars. And I'll just keep going through that round of like demoting until we end up with our absolute selects.
That's a really great tip on how to select everything, because I feel like sometimes that's hard. You're like, I don't know, this one's okay. I can't decide. Is it a yes or no?
And another tool that I use if I'm really having a hard time making selection is if I press the N key, it will take me into this viewer, and it allows me to select multiple photos and view them side by side. So I can really, compare them and say, this one, the body is a little too wide in the angle, but with this one, it's a little more slimmed down and shapely. So I can remove this one by clicking X, and then I can just pare down the comparison and go between these two. I like the facial expression on this one more, so I can eliminate that one. So this is our final. So there too, I can demote to 4 stars.
That's awesome.
And then between, like, let's say these 3, or rather these 2, because they're the same pose, do I like the tighter frame or do I like the wider frame? When you're making these decisions, you always need to keep in mind, the goal or the premise of why you're doing what you're doing. So what is this shoot? It is a commercial fitness editorial. What are the elements or the focus or the mood of the shoot? Warm, urban, gritty, intense. So if I'm going for intense, I think a closer frame is better than a farther frame. It kind of gets you up and close and personal with the subject. You're more focused on them. You feel more intimate with the subject. So this is more inspiring than this. This feels a little standoffish and distant. So we're going to go with this shot instead of this shot. And I've already demonstrated the cleanup process to it, so I don't think we need to do retouching on all of these. That was just a little quick demo. So this you would treat the exact same way of just going through in Photoshop with a healing brush pretty quickly. So we have here, if this were a proper commercial shoot, 4 deliverables that were basically ready to go in about 30 minutes, less than that, 20 minutes maybe.
Amazing.
Through some very basic lighting adjustments, some quick, comprehensive color grading and some very light, easy retouching in Photoshop.
So cool. Sean was asking if you use collections to help you organize, and I was actually kind of wondering that too, based on what I see you have open on the left in Lightroom. Where are you kind of working from within Lightroom?
So, because of my extremely comprehensive organizational setup in my folder and file structure, I don't use collections. You can see here, I'm just in the folders tab, and this is my hard drive, which stores all my pictures. And inside of that hard drive is a photo folder. And inside of that folder is all my years, my seasons, and then my shoots. So I know this might look like a collection, but everything is strictly organized by shoot.
Cool.
And we have 117,000 photos in our catalog. So we've been doing this for a while.
Yep, I know. Every time I see our numbers like that as well, I'm like, oh my God, I need to go through this folder.
So with these next couple images, I'm gonna, before editing them, try to make selections just based on the raw itself. And one thing that I've done prior to the stream to prep for it is I've actually imported all my images, sorted them, and in the library module, you can go select a number of images and go to library. And down here at previews, you can build what are called one-to-one previews. So if you're not familiar with previews, I know a lot of people edit on MacBooks, and a lot of people have not like the fully kitted out versions. They have the pretty like standard baseline MacBooks or older models or MacBook Airs, which don't have as much processing power. And programs like Lightroom and catalog-based software can kind of take a toll on their hardware and run a little slow. Previews are the solution to being able to use these tools on almost any device. So if you just import photos outright without doing anything, it has to re-render every single image that you look at, which takes a while. It's very strenuous. But building previews beforehand will pre-render all of your pictures, and it will add a little bit of extra time beforehand, but you're kind of doing that on the back end instead of the front end, so that when you're ready to sit down and go through this, you can do it lightning fast. I mean, all these images are popping up instantly, full resolution, full rendering. So you can do the one-to-one previews upon import. If you go into the import dialog box here, and up here on the right side in file handling, it will say build previews, and you get a couple options. I usually do minimal if it's a smaller shoot, which won't build any previews, and it just won't take up as much space, but you don't get that speed. But if it's something that you really need to go through quick, and I usually do this on shoots that I have a lot of pictures for, I'll do one-to-one, and it's a full size rendering. That way you can just tab through these super quick when you're making selections. So if you find yourself having trouble previewing your photos really quickly on a older or weaker computer, building previews will definitely help improve the speed of your workflow.
Cool.
So with these, I'm looking through these pretty quickly, and already I can see I like this one more than this one, so I'm going to delete that. I like this one a lot because of her expression. With these, I have a couple running shots, and I'm looking at the shape of her body for these running shots. I really want to get a silhouette that's impactful. So this one, it's a little too tight, so I can drop that. And I wanted to catch her kind of center frame, but even if she's not, that's okay. This one is a little too casual. It's not got a lot of like shape to it, and it's not intense, so I can drop that. This is more of the silhouette we're going for, so I will hold on to this one, just where the legs are stretched out, the arms are bent in a really natural way. This one is where I caught her in the center. This one is a better version of that, just because her foot is leaving the ground. You get more of a knee bend. There's some motion here, so I can actually drop this shot. And just like that, we've made our 1 to 2 final selects. I'll go into this end tab here and just look at them side by side. And I like the shape of her body in this, but I like the framing of this. But in terms of framing, I think I could get rid of this car in Photoshop. So I think this one's going to be the winner, just because I think the shape of the body is the most important element. It's way harder to change than anything in the background. So that is our select for that. And then with these three, if we're going along with that warm theme, you know, I'll pick up the temperature here in Lightroom. I'll decrease the contrast, increase the brightness. And then you see all of our information is up here in the highlights. I need to balance this out a little bit. And one thing that a lot of people don't know about the histogram is it is actually interactive. So you'll notice when you hover over it, a little text box pops up saying what area you're hovered over. So it's saying that the center part is generally exposure, just like how all these sliders control. Down here is shadows, blacks, highlights, and whites. And you'll notice that each of these sliders actually lights up when you hover over it to say that it's being activated. So if I click and drag in this area in the histogram and bring that down, you'll notice the histogram moves, but so does the exposure slider in your basic tab. So let's say I want to get some more of this information down in this area. I will grab the shadows section and pull that down, and even the blacks. And this is a pretty, it's looking a little dull. I want to bring some of that white back, so I'll pop the whites here. And that is a much more dynamic image.
Yeah.
And it'll be a little tough to judge on color for everybody on stream because everyone's viewing this on different monitors. I'm working with a color calibrated monitor, so I'm noticing a little bit of green tint here in the brick and a little bit in the ground. So I'm just going to increase the tint towards magenta just a tad to balance that out.
And what do you use for color calibrating on your computer?
There are a couple tools. I think back in the day I used to use what was called the Color Monkey. Now I use an X-Rite. I want to say it's like the X1 device. The model of the device I could be wrong about, but it's X-Rite's technology, letter X and then RITE. And it's really cool. It's a camera that you physically hang over your monitor, and it has a camera that reads the monitor itself, and then their software will flash a bunch of colors on screen, and the camera picks it up and goes, these are the colors I'm seeing, these are the colors I need to see, and then it will color shift your monitor to match like scientifically what it's supposed to be.
Wow, that's really cool.
That is a little like advanced retouching tool that a lot of industry people would know about, but people who are just starting out into their retouching career might want to look more into.
Nice.
So with this shot, I really like the way this is going. I will do a little bit of cleanup in Photoshop for this. And I just want to see how well Adobe's AI will take out this car, because that's the most important thing we need to get rid of. So I always duplicate my background layer. That's just like a workflow thing that I've been doing ever since the very beginning of my retouching career. This is what is known as non-destructive editing. So let's say I made a horrible mistake on this layer right here, and I accidentally got rid of our subject on this layer. Oh no, it's gone. What am I going to do? That's why I always preserve a background layer to save that information inside of the document. So I can always go back to this and delete this, and then we'll just try it again. So we always want to preserve our information.
Question for you. Marsha was wondering if you ever replaced body parts that work better for a desired effect or look.
I have in the past. I try to avoid it. That's one of those things that is certainly easier to get right in camera than post. And if you do retouching, but also photography, or if you do retouching for other people, it's always a huge benefit to just ask, like if you're hired to be a retoucher for a project in advance, to say, hey, can I please be on set while you're shooting it in case I have some post input? So I have done that before, where someone has hired me to be a retoucher for a product shoot. And when they're setting up, I'm kind of observing, kind of pre-planning how I'm going to be retouching certain things. And in one of our shots, we had a can on sand. And I was looking at the shots coming in the live preview, and I was going, okay, that's going to be easily retouched. That's going to be hard to retouch. And there were some elements of the sand in the product shot that I was like, that's going to be a nightmare. Like I can't deal with this. So I had the ability to go in myself and do a little bit of prop styling to make sure that things that were really easy to fix in camera, I didn't have to spend hours working on Photoshop with every single shot.
Yeah, that's a great tip. There's so many things that are better fixed in real life than fixed later on in post.
And being a good retoucher is kind of knowing which situation you're in. Because you could be on set and the photographer is trying so hard to just make this one little element work. And they're like, I just want to get this right. And you're sitting there going, I could composite that really easily. All we need is a plate. Like, let's say reflections. That's always a good example. Let's say you're shooting something that has a reflection in it. There's maybe a mirror in the background that's catching something you don't like. It's very easy to just go, you do not have to move the lights on set. You do not have to move the camera angle. Shoot what you want. And then after you're done shooting that and you're happy with what you have, let's just tilt the mirror, change the angle. I'll save that shot as a plate and composite it in 2 seconds.
Totally.
So Anna, what is your experience with Photoshop and retouching photography?
So I actually kind of started my career interested in fashion photography and commercial photography, and then got into retouching. And this is bringing back all the memories for me of when I was working with a fashion photographer and was doing her retouching. And it was where I learned many of the Photoshop skills that I still use today in my artwork. And so now my work is very much like surrealism, fantasy type art with bright colors. I still do this kind of work for clients and with my husband James for our travel business, but much more kind of like on the playful side of Photoshop now.
Mm-hmm. I mean, even if you're doing commercial work, it's always important to just continue to have fun and accept projects that you truly believe in, because when you personally connect with what you're working on, the work just comes out so much better.
Absolutely. I agree.
So, it was really helpful for me when I was choosing a niche or a specialty in my business to go with fitness content, fitness and wellness content more specifically, because fitness and wellness is a really big part of my lifestyle. And it's something that I personally connect to. So, when I'm working on stuff like this is something that I get, running, having fun, caring about your health, being motivated, being inspired, all very relevant to me. So that just helps me kind of put in a lot more effort into the stuff that I create.
Yeah. And how long have you been doing specifically the fitness and wellness?
I have been working in the fitness and wellness space for about 1.5 years now.
Okay.
And in general, I have been working as a professional creative for about 5 years.
Cool. And fully freelance, like running your own business. Is this your full-time gig?
Yes. So ever since I graduated from art school, I have not had a full-time job. I went right out of school knowing that if I wanted to work in the industry, my availability was going to be in high demand. Yeah. So I was like, I can't just get a scheduled job that's going to eat up all my hours if people need me on set for stuff, or if I'm doing a week-long project. So I just kind of leaned into it and was like, you know what, we're just going to chase down some clients or find a lot of people to work for. I did a lot of assisting work in my early days for other photographers just to get experience and, pay the bills.
Yeah.
And make connections.
That's awesome. And do you have any tips for people who might just be starting out in this field who are looking to get clients? Like, kind of, how did you get to where you are now?
It starts with a lot of self-discovery. So questions that you should be asking yourself are like, what do I want to do? Who does what I want to do? And how can I work for them? So if you want to be let's say a beauty photographer, right? Who is doing beauty photography or who is working with all of the cosmetics companies in your city? And then you need to find a way to get their attention and provide value to them without asking for much in return at first. And eventually that will come around to benefiting you.
Yeah, I love that.
So I'm going to be doing the most important part of this shot right now. I've used the lasso tool to kind of circle the area that I want to try to remove from our frame while matching the rest of the frame. And in my selection, I will right click and go down to this Content Aware Fill tab. This opens up a new window that shows me the area in the left side, the the document, and the right side, the preview, the area that I am working with, and then a preview of what it's going to do if I confirm this. So the selection area is not being sampled, but everything that's in green is being sampled. So this is telling me this is what Photoshop is using to build what it's putting inside of here. And it's not the best, but it has done a pretty good start. So it knows where the wall is coming down. And once it gets to a certain edge, it starts to kind of lose it. And with this, it's having a really hard time replicating this boundary. So this is always my first step. I just check if Content Aware Fill can solve this in a one-click method. If it cannot, I will cancel out of that. And this feels like more of a manual job. So that's okay, because this is a very repeatable pattern. This gets a little more tricky when it's a complex pattern in the background. Like, let's say there's some buildings over here, some greenery, and there's just a lot happening. It's a lot tougher to rebuild that. But with this is a flat shape and color. So we can just clone stamp sample right at the edge here. And I try to line it up as best as I can. And we are going to paint in line. And then I'm going to lift my pen and rebrush over. So the sample point moves with me. Instead of doing one long one where it starts to grab the car again and overlap, the source point overlaps with what I want to paint out, we just keep brushing and rebrushing. And that way we've extended the wall. I'm going to do my best to extend this yellow edge. And we'll start with the brick area. The street will be a little more difficult, but I just want to keep following that edge.
Do you ever do a combination of Content Aware Fill and then go back in and touch that up with the clone stamp?
Yeah, so there are times where Content Aware Fill will do a good job in the hard parts, and I will take that for what it's worth, and I will accept that and then continue to build off of that. And then with this street area here, I need to be a little more precise with this. So I'm going to create, using the pen tool, a boundary for where we need to work. And it's going to be right here to where I do not overlap the yellow line, because that is natural and adds realism to our scene. So this whole area here, perhaps that is my new, content aware area. So instead of doing the whole thing in one chunk, maybe we can do it piece by piece and I'll have an easier time rebuilding. So I'm going to content aware fill this triangle here, and it's starting to do a good job. It usually tries to pull from the immediate area around, which is a good guess of what that would be. But the content aware tool itself now allows us to manually input our source. So it's default to a negative brush, which allows you to take away. So I don't want it to sample the brick that it's painting in here, because this should only be street. So I'm going to paint away this sampling area. I just want this to be concrete. Take away our subject. We don't need any of this yellow line. We just want this like gray street material. And then it is figuring that out. And from there, that's way better.
Yeah.
That's a really good texture to work with. All we need to do now is kind of soften this edge. And I am going to probably just grab the edge we created with the pen tool. And I'll do this side by side. Make my selection. And then I will use the patch tool to use this custom selection shape and just grab from more concrete to blend that edge more. And I want to sample from darker areas because this area was a little bit darker. And you can already see just from like full view, it's already so much like less noticeable than when we were viewing it at 300%. So now we're just kind of blurring that edge. And I mean, at full scale, you don't even notice this.
Yeah, it looks so good. You would have no idea.
And I mean, the before and after, we've just removed an entire car. So with this brick repeating texture pattern, I would say this is one of those things that average viewers or consumers probably wouldn't notice. Client would notice something like that. But for the sake of being able to get to more images, I'll leave this the way it is for now. The only thing I'll do left is fixing this block behind the subject with the clone stamp tool, because remember, it's too close to our subject. If we did this with the spot healing tool, it would sample from her and kind of deform this hard edge. We want to keep that edge the exact same shape it is. So I will just very manually and precisely paint that in.
And for anyone watching who doesn't know how to fix that brick issue where it's repeating, would you just recommend kind of going back in there with the clone stamp tool, patch tool, and maybe picking some different bricks to fill it in?
Yeah, the clone stamp tool is a great manual solution to this, and I would be a lot more precise about where I'm sourcing from and get a little more variety from this side. Another relatively quick fix is to just sample this outright. And this is if I'm trying to save time on an edit that doesn't need to be too precise. I will take a selection of some brick, duplicate it to its own layer. So we now have this isolated, and I will move this over here. Maybe we can make it a little more different on this side. And I will just distort this to kind of fit this in where it belongs. Let's say something like that without stretching it too much. Something like that. And then I can just kind of erase the edges away to blend it out a little bit.
Cool.
And then maybe not that white area, because that's like a really specific pattern that appears. And then from there, you just get a little more variety.
Yeah. Yeah, that helps a lot.
So a before and after.
Amazing.
Oh, and if we didn't create our vignette to match the other shot in Lightroom, I can always do that in Photoshop as well. So a personal trick that I like to do to make vignettes in Photoshop is I will use the elliptical marquee tool. I'll throw a really heavy feather on it, anywhere between 500 and 800 pixels. And I will just drag the marquee out from the corner to about the shape that we want the vignette to be. And this is cool because you can kind of see the shape you're making in real time. And now that our selection is made with a feather, I can just create a levels layer. And it creates a levels layer with the mask of our selection with the shape of vignette. Now it's showing this because it's a mask, white being what's visible and black what's invisible. It's showing the effect of this layer on the inside. So if I bring this down, you'll see the darkness happens in the opposite place we want it. To quickly flip that, I will do Control or Command I to invert the mask. And now you will see that the vignette appears exactly where we need it to be. So I'm going to bring the white point down a little bit on this levels layer so we get that darkened edge. And there is our vignette. So once again, our focus is on the subject.
Nice.
And the thing that I do is I always like to make my numerical inputs multiples of 5 or multiples of 2. But that's just because I'm a little weird. It's just so much more satisfying to have precise values.
So
and it does make it easier for changes, especially when a client comes to you for a revision and they say it's too bright or it's too dark. That doesn't really give you a lot to work with. You don't know what their tolerance is for those things. So when it comes to stuff like that are kind of subjective, I do things in percentages. So if someone says it's just a little too bright, I will dial it back 10 to 20%. If they say it's way too bright, I'll dial it back 50%. So people work better with percentages because they're kind of more subjective.
And so would you tell them that, like, okay, I'll dial it back 10%, or do you kind of just keep that for your own internal notes?
It depends on who the client is. If it's a more personal or small business client, they're not really going to know a lot about that. If it's for a commercial client or an agency or a large business, they know the lingo and the language a little more, and they have a more firm grasp on the tastes. I was actually doing a commercial retouching job last week, and the client came back and said, the color is wrong. It's not the right hue and shade. We need it to be more yellow. And I went, I don't know what that means, but what I did was I took a color overlay, put it on the product that they needed to change the color of, and I sent them 5 versions. I sent them the same color overlay at 20%, 40%, 50%, 60, and 80%. I sent them all 5 images, and I said, tell me which one you like the most. And they ended up picking the one that I was like 60%. And I said, okay, and then we're going to use 60% color overlay for the rest of the entire project. And they approved it.
Wow. That's super interesting. And so you just did a color overlay on all of them versus changing like the temperature or anything like that?
Yeah. So in the commercial world, your clients are going to be really specific about what they want, which makes my job easier. So some clients will come to you with an exact Pantone color and say, our packaging in real life is this exact color. Here is the digital hex code or Pantone color. We need it to just put that on it, and everything needs to match this. So it gives you a really objective, like concrete place to start from. But yeah, when a client comes to you and says things like, it's not the right color, you can't really come back to them and go, what's the right color or what do you want? Because it's hard for people to articulate these things that aren't visual artists.
Right.
So our job is to kind of be a translator of visual language and say, I know you don't know about hue, saturation, and luminance values, but everyone knows what 20% is. Everyone knows what 50% is.
That's such a great tip.
So I'm going to save this document in our edited folder so we have that for later. And then to go back to these images, I'm going to move away from these parking garage shots, and I'm going to move on to some more interesting scenes like this. Now, this is at the same parking garage, but we flipped the angle. We had her standing up on a platform, and we used an entirely different backdrop. And this is the big benefit of shooting in a space like this that is a technically open top garage, is you get the adjacent buildings as backdrops, which are really clean, flat profiles, but you also have access to really deep scenes with complex textures and beautiful buildings that serve as your backdrop. So with these, I think now that we see a little more sunlight, because this is kind of all just like shaded and there's not really like a lot of direct lighting sources, these shadows are really soft. With these, we have the opportunity to color grade it with some motivation behind it. So we see the sun here reflecting off of the buildings. So this justifies our warm edit a lot more. So now you kind of get an idea that like the sun is present in this scene. And I'm gonna just balance out the color a little bit. I'm gonna bring down our highlights to bring some detail back in here. Pick up the shadows so we can see the subject a lot better. And I'm going to bring the contrast down like we've been doing, which apparently is a trend that I wasn't aware of. I've just been doing it because I was just experimenting one day and found that it was just a much more satisfying look.
Yeah, it's weird. I've been noticing like in a lot of tutorials that I have been watching and stuff, like people doing that lately.
I think it's a little bit of like a reaction to culture. Because I remember the earlier days of social media digital photography, everything was about punchy contrast, rich textures, sharp HDR style images.
Yeah.
From like 2011 all the way through like about 2016-ish. And then after that, everything kind of flipped and people got really sick of that look. And they wanted to do almost the exact opposite. So we started seeing a lot more flat stuff, a lot more like deep color profile, high saturation, pastel tones.
Totally.
So with this shot, I am going to highlight the power of Lightroom Classic's new and advanced masking system. I know I wanted to say that this light is motivated and the color is motivated by the sun. So we're going to create a couple illusions to really make it look sunny in this shot. We have our color grading exactly where we want. Everything looks pretty much where we want it to be. I'm gonna add a little bit of yellow desaturation just to make this a little less punchy than the subject, because we're getting a lot of orange tints in her skin tone. So I don't want this to overshadow her. I'm going to remove saturation from the yellow to take attention away from this and back towards our subject. And I'm going to move the yellow hue a little towards orange just to make it warmer in general. So from here, the sun in real life was somewhere around here or around here behind these buildings, kind of shooting and bouncing off all this glass. So to emphasize that, I'm going to use some masks, and we have a series of really advanced mask features now. These are our classic brush linear radials. They've added now select sky, select subject, along with our more intense and technical color range, luminance range, and depth range. A trick that I use for quick edits, and actually even in some of my more advanced stuff, is do not sleep on the simplicity of a radial gradient. I've been using these for years just to add a little bit of shape to my images. And I'll show you what that means right here. So I'm going to create a radial gradient from the top left corner to about just where this edge starts to touch my subject. And you can see here the mask is showing that it's visible in the corner and then fades off in a circular shape. From there, I'm going to increase the exposure, increase the warmth, and also decrease the dehaze a little bit. Now, all of a sudden, this looks like flare. There isn't actually flare in our scene, but we have created artificial flare, which adds another layer of depth to our image.
Yes. Yeah, the radial gradient is incredible. I use that all the time, and it really changes how an image looks.
So let's turn this off and on again to see the before and the after of just that radial gradient. Already, our scene looks so much more dynamic. And this kind of goes in line with what I was describing earlier about we are painting with light, we are shaping light to shift focus and attention to the things we want. So this flare here says to our audience, there is a sun, and the sun is shining on our subject here. Your eyes kind of start with this bright spot, and then it points right at her face. And that's the reason why we had the mask just touch the edge of her, because we want it to lead into her and then carry the subject through the rest of the frame. And if this were true to life flare, you know, when you're shooting it, you don't want flare to actually cover your subject, because then it makes them look a little soft. But just a hint of overlap will really like point to them. Another thing that I do, and I always do this combo, is I'll create a radial mask of highlight, and then I will create a radial mask of shadow on the inverse to really shape that light up. So I'll show you here. I'll create another radial mask, and starting from almost the exact same point that I started the first one, I will drag that out and I will make it considerably larger than the first one. And this one will go all the way towards the edge of our frame. And you will see why in a second. So it's showing that our mask is appearing on the entire image. I am going to click on these three dots here for some additional masking options. And I'm going to invert this mask. And you can also use Control or Alt with the colon key. I think also just the colon or the apostrophe key does the same thing. So just clicking apostrophe will flip that inside out. So now we see here that our mask is only appearing on the bottom right corner of our frame and then feathering off towards the center. So if I do the opposite effect where I bring down the exposure and maybe even increase or decrease some of the shadows and a little bit of the blacks, now we have layers to our image. So it starts with this and then shapes off into this, and it really looks like this flare is what's lighting the entire scene.
Very cool.
So if I turn all of our masks on and off, you'll notice immediately your eyes just move to a different part of the frame. And that is the power of painting with light, especially in a digital sense.
I love it. Makes it look so much more dynamic and interesting.
So we don't really want our audience spending too much attention over here on the bottom, because this is just a texture. This is just a platform. So we want to move it as much as upward as possible right to this point. So we start here, make our way here, come down, and then we kind of don't get lost in here. We stay away from here because it's super dark and uninteresting, but it still adds the texture and the depth that we need for this image. I'm also going to showcase a great tool that Lightroom has had for a little while now called Select Subject. This is something that I used to do in Photoshop all the time. And now I can do it really quickly in Lightroom. So Photoshop has had the Select Subject tool for, I think, about 2 years now or so, maybe 2.5, 3. But it was kind of hidden. It was tough to get to. It wasn't like a very front-facing feature, but it was one of those like Photoshop hacks that people used to do where it was just a difficult to find tool that was really useful. I would always create masks using Select Subject in Photoshop and then create curves layers or levels layers and increase the brightness of the subject to separate them from the backdrop if it was looking a little flat and further increase that attention to our subject. So Lightroom now has that built in, which is phenomenal. You can see here, it's done an AI detection. It's cut out a perfect outline of our subject. This would have taken, before AI tools were integrated, just like maybe 15 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes of just manual selections or pen tooling or masking. Now it's just in one click, which is great for retouchers to get work done quicker. And once I have my subject cut out, I'm going to bring up the white slider just a little bit, maybe like 15 to 20 points. And you can see here that just adds a little bit of a pop, which separates them from the backdrop. I'll zoom in here so you can see it a little clearly. Just a nice pop that adds further attention to our subject. Now, if you are following the trend here, you already know what my next step is going to be. I'm going to do the inverse once again and click Select Subject. So we have another mask that is our subject. But for this one, I'm going to invert it again. So now it is everything except the subject. And you can see here that it's masking everything else. I'm going to bring the exposure down of that a little bit. And now our subject is even further separated from the backdrop, which creates more attention. And if I turn all these masks on and off, this image all of a sudden, it was a great image to start with, but now it looks super flat when you realize the potential that it has with local masks.
Yeah. Wow. So amazing. I love it.
Another thing that I haven't gotten a ton into is cropping. So I don't do a ton of cropping. I try to get my compositions right in camera. I'll shoot a little wider and give some breathing room in case I need to punch in a little bit. And with this shot, I feel like I'm getting too much of this stone. So I'm going to pull this up. And me personally, I always leave my aspect ratios at original. I'm a 2:3 kind of guy. But if you're making a post for Instagram, let's say, you would need to set it to 4:5. And this is how it would appear on Instagram's crop. So let's just set this up for Instagram, an Instagram post really quick. I'm going to bring this in here. And I want to make sure she's pretty centered and then there's balance to it. And when I say balance, I mean equal negative space on the right side and the left side from our subject to the edge of the frame. So since this arm is poking out, but this leg is poking out, we might have to shift it a little more to the right. Even though that wouldn't perfectly center her head to the center point, her overall shape would kind of be more centered. So now we're getting a lot more even space on the left and the right side of the frame. So I'm super happy with this composition, and we still have our masks in place. So our lighting is still super dynamic. And the way to do this in camera would be to get a strobe, put it on a 40-foot tall stand, hang it way over her head, shoot it into the camera and the back of her, and then like I don't even know how you'd get this serious fall off in camera. Like this basically has to be done digitally unless you had like a little bit of like a neutral density like patch that you kind of put in front of your lens. But this can all be done in about 5 minutes in Lightroom, which makes this so convenient.
Yes, the power of Lightroom is a beautiful thing.
So we did the before and after of our masks, but I also want to show just a before and after of the entire image. And we started with something like this and have completely changed the mood of it.
Wow. That is super impressive.
And I can even do a virtual copy to reset those adjustments. And then we can show these side by side.
Oh my God. I hope you all just saw that magic right there. That is incredible.
And all of these edits were done without any complex retouching. These were all done with extremely basic tools in Lightroom. All we touched was basic hue saturation, color grading, and masks.
Yeah.
And we didn't have to manually paint any masks. We use radials and select subject. Like at no point did I need my tablet to kind of like hand paint any edges in or anything like that.
I know. I mean, that select subject tool is so powerful.
It has saved me hours of my life.
Yeah.
So thank you, Adobe.
I agree. Everyone is very into it in the chat. Question for you. Do you, when you're adjusting your curves, or sorry, your contrast and your color, are you ever using curves, or are you kind of just mainly staying in those upper brackets?
Oh, are they talking about the tone curve tool here in Lightroom? I don't touch the tone curve here in Lightroom as much as I do in, let's say, Photoshop. And the reason being, it took me a while to figure this out, but inside of Lightroom, there is actually a hidden hierarchy of tools. So when you work on certain tools, it will apply those adjustments above all other tools. The tone curve I've found is one of the highest priority ones. So let's say I did just a new image. Let's say this one with a tone curve. I did a yellow tint in the blue channel and like, let's say a little red. Let's like warm this up with the tone curve, right? Instead of white balance. This is like a pretty orangey tint. If I made this image black and white with the V key, you'll notice that it's not black and white. It still has the orange tint. And that's because the tone curve applies above the black and white feature. So I can make an image, and if I hide the tone curve adjustments, it's black and white underneath. If I turn on my tone curve, it is no longer black and white. It has color tint to it. So these color tints apply on top of the black and white feature. And the same goes with the tone curve on all of these other settings. So let's say I reset all of my tone curve channels. I have a black and white image and I want to adjust white balance. If I warm it up, it does not increase the color warmth of it. It just increases the warmth of the image underneath the black and white layer applied to it inside of Lightroom. So I try to avoid the curve tool just because it's such a global adjustment that if I need to modify it, it changes everything else dramatically.
Yeah, that's probably one of the most interesting and different tips that I've heard about using the tone curve, because I know a lot of people use it. And so that's really useful to know that it goes on top of everything else.
That's why for color grading, I actually do prefer the color grading tool now more than the tone curve. Just because you already have it separated into shadows, highlights, midtones, versus back in the day when you'd have to put a 3 anchor points on it to lock in those things and then adjust them one by one. This is kind of a simplified version of that, and it's not as like overarching to everything else. But don't get me wrong, I do love the tone curve. And prior to the color grading tool coming out, I have all of these custom presets that I've created for myself. And they're all color based. So none of these presets, or almost none of these presets, change any of the basic settings. These I leave blank because you shoot every image differently. The lighting conditions are always going to be different. There is no way for me making my preset to be like, I know you're going to underexpose by a stop, or I know you don't have enough contrast in your sensor. So I let that up to whatever the image has in it, because they're all so different from one another. But I use them as kind of like a color changer, or a palette rather. So let's say like with this creative horror one I've made, I did this when I was doing like a horror themed photo shoot, and it adds some really creepy colors into it. But you notice once I've applied it, I don't get any exposure, contrast, highlights, shadows, whites, blacks adjustments. So all of those basic settings are staying the same, and it's just applying a color overlay. And we've done that through the curves here. We've done that through the hue and saturation, a little bit of color grading. So I like to do all of these settings for my presets. I don't do any of these settings
That's
because
super interesting.
now I have control over, okay, I can brighten this like I want to. I can make the highlights darker, shadows, more contrast, maybe like darker whites. And then that's all I need to do for that. And then the color treatment is already finished for this.
Awesome. So then that allows you to really apply it to any photo, whereas most presets, if you apply it to a brighter photo versus a darker photo, it's going to just completely like mess it up. Whereas this will just apply the color. Is that right?
Yeah. And I think when I created all these, I tried to stay true to the idea of what a preset was intended for. Some people use them as like a one-click finish edit. But for me personally, I think they're a starting point, not an end point. So a preset's intent or purpose is to show you the potential of your image, and it gives you kind of like inspiration and ideas of where you could go with it. So sometimes if I'm working on a shoot that is like a personal shoot, I don't really know what the mood is going to be yet. I'll just hover over these and then kind of give me a little preview of what it could look like. So I just kind of tab through these and see like, oh, maybe like this shot, like with the bright tones looks really good. And I like the soft, edges of everything. So I'll apply that, and maybe I want to still go for that warm look. I can just increase the white balance and make it a warmer image. Suddenly it's color correct. And now it has all these cool, effects on it.
Mm.
And just through a little bit of basic editing, I can get it to that finish point. But if I just applied the preset on its own, we're certainly not there yet.
Right. Yeah, that's a really interesting way to look at presets and to use them. I like that.
I do suggest that people make their own presets. It allows you to really hold on to your style, and allows you to grow as an artist and take things in directions you didn't really expect them to. So let's say you worked on a shoot that you really liked, you loved the color profile of it. Take that preset, throw it on something you shot months later, and suddenly it looks amazing, and you never would have thought to go back and do that old style again. I did that recently when I was working on some concert photography that I did, where I had a really creative preset I made in a portrait fashion session. And it has like all these soft effects on it, and all these it does a lot of like really cool tinting to the shadows. But I shot a concert, and then I just hovered over it, and I was like, wait, that looks so good with this like stage lighting. And I just kind of tweaked it a little bit with the lighting adjustments for the different scenario. And I got an entire portfolio piece out of that.
Wow, that's so cool.
I figured we'd work on a horizontal image just for the audience to see easier on their horizontal screens. We've been doing a lot of vertical stuff, and most of my stuff is vertical for social and web. But occasionally you will get the horizontal request if it's for a like homepage of a website or for a advertising banner. So, I mean, if we're talking about presets, let's just like dive it a little bit into presets. I have a couple different presets that I've made over the years, including some fitness ones that I've made in preparation for this editing session. So I've been really playing around with warm tones, and mostly warm tones, but I had an inspiration recently that came to me about a lot of purple and cyan. So I wanted to play with that, and I ended up coming up with this look. And I think this makes it look very urban, which fits the intention of the shoot. So if we make it a little darker, so we're kind of going the opposite direction with this. We've been doing a lot of bright, warm, airy, fun. Now we're going to go to more like intense, cool, passionate style. So I can do a really quick breakdown of this once I get the lighting adjustments where I want it to be. So with this shot, our white balance is a lot cooler than it was before. I've dragged the temperature down. I think the tint is about where it was, maybe like a little more green than it started out at. But I'm bringing a lot of these settings down because I want it to be more moody, more dramatic. Especially in a scene like this where she's kind of looking over the city and she's got the buildings in the background, feels kind of like isolated. If you think of movie inspirations, maybe like The Matrix, or Inception, stuff like that. So we've increased the brightness, or the vibrance considerably, because we really want to pump out those colors. And most of this look can be attributed to the color grading panel. If I turn that off and on, you'll see it really brings out all this color depth to it. So in the highlights, I've added a cyan hue and a very, very tiny bit of saturation. And in the shadows, I've added a little bit of red to kind of counteract that, because red and cyan are almost opposites in the color wheel. They are complementary. And it really makes these shadows separate, so we get more distinction from our subject than all these bright buildings. And they just blend together to make this beautiful purple tint, which I love.
Yeah, so nice.
And you can see here, nothing in the curves. So there's no tone curve adjustments. There's no HSL adjustments. It's strictly just color grading wheels and white balance. And that will take this image to this image.
Wow.
I'm also going to add, like in the previous shot, some of those radial adjustments. So I'm going to do a big radial adjustment coming from the top left corner, because of these reflections, that's where the light is being motivated. I'm going to increase the whites, increase a little bit of warmth here. Actually, we're going to keep everything cool, but I will increase the exposure, bring the highlights down just to preserve some of that detail. And then dehaze is going to go up to kind of flatten out all those shadows. And this radial gradient is not as important as the next one we're going to be working on, because we really want to shift focus very heavily. So I'm going to take another one, pull it all the way out to almost the edge of the frame, invert it, and then bring down our exposure a lot. And now with the darkness of the shot, those colors really make their mark and they stand out. We just don't want to cover our subject too much in shadow. And I actually bring this pretty close to the center, because we don't mind darkening these edges a little bit, because ultimately we want our focus to go here. In this horizontal shot, we have a lot more negative space up here. So I'm fighting this a little bit to shift attention back down to this. And then from there, a fun little trick I can do is, prior to when select subject was a feature, I used to just take tiny radial masks and just put them over my subject, then increase the brightness. Now select subject is the way to do it, but this was a fun workaround that I did back in the day, where I would just kind of try to pop little bits of highlight into our subject here.
I remember doing that too.
Keep the attention over here. But instead of that, select subject is now the go-to.
I always like seeing how good of a job it does.
I mean, that's phenomenal. We're getting a little bit of bleed here. And the benefit with this being integrated into Lightroom, and one of the smartest things I think they've ever done with this, is they have the add and subtract button. So not only can you just create a mask in one click, but you can really modify it using any of these other tools. They're all kind of integrated with one another. So I'm going to do a subtract from this subject mask using the brush tool. And I'm going to zoom in here. And we're going to show our overlay so we can see what we're working with here. And I will use my stylus for this, just to get those natural brush movements in. And I'm just going to paint away at all this stuff that isn't included in our subject. Another great tool for this is the auto mask feature, which came out a while ago. Prior to select subject as well, I used to just turn on auto mask, do a brush, and just paint over my subject. And I actually did a really good job of detecting those edges. I feel like everything in Lightroom and everyone's like fun little techniques and stuff was all just leading up to the select subject tool coming out.
I know. It's such a game changer.
And, you know, this might also be a hot take, but I'm willing to go as far as say this new masking suite in Lightroom actually allows for people to begin their retouching careers inside of Lightroom.
Absolutely. I would agree with that.
So we're just making sure we're catching this edge, not including any of the buildings. And I like to be very precise with my masks.
So auto mask is making sure that you're catching like her leg. Is that?
Yeah. So auto mask is kind of a AI powered tool that allows Lightroom to detect edges better. So it doesn't necessarily have to be your subject, but if you're painting, let's say a product like a can, auto mask, if you're painting within that can, will try not to bleed outside of it. So as I'm painting along, you'll see that my brush overlaps with her leg a little bit, but it's still not getting rid of the mask that exists within her. And it's detecting this edge and trying not to bleed over into it.
Nice. Yeah, I actually didn't know about that feature, so that's really helpful.
It is on by default, which I think is great, just in case people don't know about it, don't learn about it. But you can turn it off if you want to just manually paint stuff and have a little bit of bleed over. So I'm just grabbing the edge of these shoes, making sure we're not catching the building, because the bleed is pretty subtle and not noticeable if you're just doing one adjustment. But with our inversion technique, if you have like an edge that doesn't make sense and you make one side brighter and one side darker, you're really separating that edge and you will start to see issues in your masks. So this technique does kind of call for a little bit more refined masking.
So Daniel, what are some of your favorite clients that you've worked with over the years, and or favorite shoots that you've done?
I have had the pleasure and opportunity to work with Google back in the day. I actually shot their Wellness Week, which falls in line so well with what I do. Yeah, it was a great experience. I got to listen to and photograph some amazing speakers who specialize in the wellness space, especially the mental health space. And a funny connection, the speakers that I've photographed at Google Wellness Week have led on to become one of my own clients as well. And they are definitely one of my favorite clients. They're called Live Better Co. And their whole mission is to inspire their clients and their community to have the best day ever every single day, which I just love that message.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing. So cool.
I've also worked with UFC gyms in the past. I created a small commercial for them last summer, and that was a really fun set because we actually had like a proper budget to get good talent, good prep, all the gear we needed for it, scheduling enough time to make it, and that was like a really comfortable production.
Yeah, that always helps, having all of that. And are you kind of seeking your clients, or is it word of mouth, or are you reaching out to people?
That's a great question. I think for a lot of people early in their career, like one thing I experienced early was I was going around asking established professionals, like, how do you get work? I need to get work. And they're always like, I don't know. It just kind of comes to me. And that was really frustrating to hear someone starting out, because I was like, it is not coming to me.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, it's just word of mouth. Like I've had this client and then they pass me along that client, they pass me on that client. And in the creative professional space, it is very momentum based. You know, once you get X amount of jobs, there are many, many people out there who are kind of passing your name around and doing all of your marketing for you. But starting out is really difficult. And I think starting out, it's a lot of proving yourself, doing a little bit of free work here and there, but only to people that you can see the value in and people that you believe in. And a lot of just making stuff, to be honest. Like,
yeah,
if you aren't working, you should be making like test shoots, promotional materials, just stuff to show off in your portfolio. You should always be practicing, improving, or making things to keep you like in habit. So when a job does come around, you are ready for it.
absolutely. And I feel like that's one of the ways that people get work, is by doing these spec jobs or showing their work off in their portfolio or on Instagram. And then that's what, when people say the work is coming to me, it usually is coming from those methods.
Yeah, I mean, when before I get into that, another if the radial tool isn't working for this like kind of light shaping effect, Another thing I like to do is same thing, but with linear gradients. If I want more like of a geometric shape to my light, I'll just come in from one side. And if you hold down the shift key, it will snap your angle into a right angle. Yeah, so 90 degrees vertical or 90 degrees horizontal. So I'm moving my mouse up and down, but you'll see that the shape is still staying pretty straight. And I'll drag that in and then do the same thing where I want to darken this building or this edge. So I kind of shape more this way. And then the same thing over here. Maybe I'll do another linear gradient and shape things this way. So I'm kind of creating a V shape around her to point at her. And from there, we have a dramatically different image. Oh, one thing I actually want to highlight too is when I was saying that people can actually get their retouching start in Lightroom, going over to this spot removal tool, they have a clone and a heal version, which are very similar to the clone and healing tools we were using in Photoshop earlier. So if you're still apprehensive about using Photoshop, you can start practicing using these tools in this program. You have a little bit less control, but they are extremely powerful here still. So I'm going to do the healing tool, and you can, like with blemishes, like really simple blemishes on your subject, pick a point, paint over them, make sure you're selecting a good source point of relevant texture and good skin tone. And just like that, blemishes are gone.
Amazing.
I can turn that off and on. And that's the difference. And this is, I would argue, a fully retouched image, all done entirely in Lightroom.
So cool. Let's check out the before and after.
All right, here we go. Are you guys ready?
Yes.
Bam, that to that.
Wow. Oh, looks so good. I love seeing before and afters. I think it's so fun.
Oh, that is like half the reason why I'm a photographer, is just the satisfaction of the before and afters. Feels so good.
Absolutely. Wow.
Oh, and I think so this is a side-by-side comparison, and the mood is so different. The subject is way more apparent, and the focus, like when I keep talking about the focus, like you look at this and you look at this. Where does your eye go in this? Goes up here, and everywhere around her. And this shot starts here, right to her. Does not bother with any of this. And it gets kind of like locked in over here. And that's the thing, is like if attention is always moving and people are always trying to trying to keep interest, it's about really like controlling the attention. So start here, go here, and you stay here. You don't really wander off very much anywhere else, but you just can't stop looking at this. And in this shot, you want to look at everything except this, because it's so dark. Another way that I can display the difference is with this tool. There we go. Before and after, left, right split.
Oh, yeah.
So this just kind of shows. Oh, am I on the, let me get that fixed again. There we go. Before and after. Delete this virtual copy. Go to this shot.
There we go.
So before and after, top to bottom, left to right.
Yeah, I love seeing it like that.
Major difference.
Yeah.
And now that we have all these sets, since all this modification was done in Lightroom, we have these settings saved. We can turn it into a preset to use in future projects if we really like the cool tone of this. And I would say that this cool toning is kind of universal. You can almost use it in any outdoor setting to give it this look. And in addition, we can use it to batch edit this project. So I am of the opinion that people should front end their work. And by that, I mean, spend the most amount of time editing the first picture really lock in the look you're going for. And that way, once that's like really dialed in, you can just apply it to everything else and suddenly everything's cohesive. But you spent all your time working at the beginning. That way, the rest of the process just moves smoothly.
Yeah. And do you
So
ever
I can, oh, go on.
do you ever find that sometimes if you spend a lot of time on this first image and then batch apply it and maybe make some local adjustments on another image, that you kind of end up going back and adjusting all of them again? Like, for example, sometimes I'll be working on that first photo, make everything, think it looks really good. And then as I kind of move on and keep working on the others, I'm like, oh, wait, actually, I should have added this color. And I'm just kind of like continuing to go back and update it. I don't know. Do you deal with that too?
Yeah, I mean, it's never in a bad way. There's two situations that it happens in. The first one being I'll apply this to another image. And then I'll notice that, oh, maybe it'd be better if I did this tweak and it works better on the second image. And then I'll take it back to the first image and I go, okay, it does work better. Like, good, we can update it, make it better. The second one is I'll take it to another image and I'll go, oh, I didn't even notice this thing. Like, I catch another mistake that I didn't see earlier. And that kind of allows me to fix it in the first place and helps me kind of correct myself.
Yeah, very true.
So another good workflow tip is with this masking tool. I love making masks now. I make so many of them in Photoshop that it's kind of translated over to Lightroom where I'll just have a ton of layers and masks. You should name them to stay organized. It helps. Just looking at it, it's kind of hard to tell what the adjustments are, where it is. So naming them is really important. So I'll just name this like subject. I'll name this one background. And then I'll just name this dark and right because it's darken and coming from the right side. And then I'll just name this dark and left. So now that all of our masks are named, it helps us with the batch editing process because you can go in and when you're copying and batch editing, you can now include your masks as part of it and individually, which is huge. So let's say I don't want in the vertical shots to do a big like darken the right side because there's not as much right side negative space to bring down. I don't include that, but I still want to include the subject. I still want to include the background. And I still want to include these little vignettes that I've created. So I'll leave out these large linear gradients that I've named so it's easier to know which ones I'm referring to. Otherwise, these just all say mask 1, mask 2, mask 3, and then you really don't know what they're doing. So that's a good organizational tip. And I'll copy those and I'll apply them to a vertical shot like this, or let's get something with more buildings in it. Yeah, like that. This is a great shot for it. I'll paste these settings over to here. And in a recent Lightroom update, because this used to kind of be an issue, but they actually completely fixed this. When you would copy masks that used AI detection, like subject selection and sky selection, you would paste them on a new image and it would know that there's a subject selection mask, but it wouldn't have the same subject. So it wouldn't know what to do. And it would just say, this mask needs to be recalculated. And then you'd click a button and then it would redo it, but it wouldn't be too bad. Now they've updated it. So they've even eliminated that step. So it's even easier where, as you saw the little dialogue loading box, it just says, hey, there's a subject detection mask in this copy and paste. We just need to figure that out really quick before we apply it. And it does it before all the effects go in. So I'm catching a little bit of,
yeah, what is that coming from?
So it didn't do a perfect subject grab on this. These little streaks are from the AI, just not catching it all the way. Actually, that's not true. It did a great job of selecting the subject. These are our manual erasures from grabbing the edge, I believe, from the other image. So I'm just going to go in and recalculate this subject by just making a new subject mask. And then we can just take all these same settings and copy them over. And like I said, it's a very new feature of them auto calculating this, so it will improve over time.
Right.
But I really like the direction they're going in with it. So this is what, 0.2 exposure, 1658. Okay. And it doesn't have to be exact. We can kind of eyeball it. So that's about where we needed to be. So now we can delete this subject layer. And then with the background layer, we can actually just paint that in to manually fix it. So I'm gonna do the you can see brush 1. It's this right here.
Oh yeah.
But we can actually delete those because it saved the brush strokes from our last one. So all I have to do is delete brush 1, and now that is correct. And we already did this one, so we could have also deleted brush 1 on this as well. And now we have copy and pasted, looks perfect.
Yeah, that's so cool. And so would you usually, if you were doing this on your own for yourself or for a client, would you copy and paste a look like that? Or would you make a preset for yourself and keep the masks in the preset, or doesn't it matter?
I would do it actually almost exactly as I've done on stream today. So with this shot, I would start with this. I would get it to this point. I would copy these settings, batch paste them across all the images as it calculates those subjects. I can talk about a little more. So I would work on the first picture, get the look down. Then I would apply it to the entire shoot, deliver it to client, go through revisions if we need to, but then deliver that. And I would save those presets. I would save that look as a preset for future jobs or future projects. So my workflow consists of getting everything to Lightroom, treating it as we've been doing so far, taking it into Photoshop for retouching, and then sending that off.
Cool.
But the look is almost entirely like complete in Lightroom. So now that we know the quick fix to this, I'm going to go into the background here. I'm going to delete this brush. And in the subject, I'm going to also delete this brush.
Is there a way to keep that from coming over when you're pasting it on the other images?
When it comes to batch editing, the trick is to make the process as simple as possible. So as little manual manipulation as possible is ideal. So with this shot, what I would do if I really wanted to like get the batch processing workflow down is I wouldn't even do the brushing in this. I would just do the subject. Then I would batch apply it to everything. And then I would go in and do all my manual adjustments on each image.
Okay.
Just so it's not taking that extra work with all of them.
Right.
So for example, now that I've deleted the brush on this shot, so it's just subject detection, I can actually copy off of this one, recopy off of this one, and then apply them to everything else. I'm going to replace all those masks.
Such a great feature, being able to apply it to all of the images like that. And I tend to forget about it sometimes, even though I've used it many times over the years. I'm like, oh, I have to edit this photo again and this one again. And
No, I get that. I mean, as I spend way too much time editing like my own stuff because I get so specific about the details, and I'm in love with the process. Like I love manipulating images and changing stuff. And it's really easy for me to just get caught up and just spend hours retouching things, especially if it's for my like personal usage.
Absolutely. I totally agree.
So we've got, let's just review these really quick to make sure that they all went through properly. So we have this, and like with a shot like this, we can always do adjustments after the fact. I would just pick up the exposure of this a little bit and maybe some of the shadows so we can see our subject better. She was looking a little dark, especially with the way that the masks are overlapping her. But this is great. Maybe even increasing the saturation of the skin tone so bring some life into that. Yeah, just a little more life into that. So we've picked up this orange. And it's a really subtle adjustment. Probably kind of hard to see on stream, but we just add a little bit of extra tint in these highlight areas here. So in editing this one picture for like maybe 30 minutes, we have gone on to get, let's see, 7 deliverables for, let's say,
Wow.
our mock client. So even still, like, we can give them all these pictures and then they can go through and go, we like this one, this one, and this one, and then you just deliver them out, right? Or do
Right.
revisions if needed.
And do you ever give clients kind of like a basic color look, say like this, and see which ones they like? And then do you go back in and do any sort of like final touch-ups on the subject and adjusting those masks or anything? Or when you deliver that first round, are they pretty much what you are happy and final with?
That is a really good question. And I think that that's something that's not talked about enough, like an industry thing that happens that people don't know about who aren't industry. When you're working with a big client, you need, any client for that matter, you need to outline your entire workflow to them and have an agreed upon timeline and scope of work. So, and in any medium you do, whether it's graphic design, illustration, video, photo, you want to make sure, when is this due by? What do you want and how many of it? And what is it supposed to look and feel like? Those are all conversations that need to be happen well before any contracts are signed or any deposits are paid, to make sure that you're on board with exactly what you're doing. So for me, let's say I was doing a really simple, like, I was working with a personal client. So a trainer hit me up for a photo shoot for their branding. I would say, okay, how many deliverables do you need? How many videos, how many photos do you want out of this? When do you need these by? Where are they going? Website, socials, mailers, billboards, promos, ads. And, you know, if it's due on this date, we need to get a first draft out by, let's say, a week before that. And then we have the second week to do all revisions. You get 2 rounds of revisions. So I would come back. I would do this for a client. Like, this is what I would give the client right now in its current state. And if it was a commercial client, I'd give them 2 rounds of revisions. So I'd say, here's what I've come up with for you. Is there anything you need changed about it? Am I on the right track for look and feel? And they'd say, no, let's say we want a warm shot. Then I'd be like, okay. And then I would go and edit it like this. And I'd tend to give this to them. Like, okay, this was what you wanted on your first round of revision. More specifically, are there little details you want? Like, oh, we need to remove this building over here. We need to change the color of the shoes. We need to make her brighter, or we need, copy here in the corner. That's more of like, as you go on with rounds of revisions, they get more and more detailed. But the first round is just overall look and feel. So like, is this the right direction? Yes. Okay. What small details do we need changed about it, or haven't gone through approval yet? And then after those are corrected, the job is done. If they come back to you after that, you have to say, okay, well, we've reached our scope of work limitation. We either need a extended timeline or increased budget. You could potentially charge them per extra round of revision, just so, you're making sure that you're getting paid for your time.
Yeah, that is so helpful. Such great advice. Thank you for sharing that.
The last shot, because I think we're running out of time, right?
Yeah, we only have a few minutes left. I don't know if you have anything else to share, but also for the chat on Behance and YouTube, if you have any last minute questions for Daniel, now is the time to get them in as we wrap up here.
So I wanted to give a little bit of variety in what we were showing today. So I did some just editorial fitness portraits and scenes. I also wanted to do a little bit of product. So typically you'll find in a bigger shoot, the client wants to fit as much stuff as possible in there. So they're like, we need to shoot the model. We need to shoot the top. We need stuff for the bottoms. We need stuff for the shoes. We want to cover all of our bases with this. So you've got to maximize what you're delivering to them in terms of value. So I did a couple shots of just the shoes that they could use as a shoe product shot, not specific to any other clothing line or labels or the talent themselves. So with this shot, I'm going to throw on another preset I made for this specific shoot. Just to quickly edit this in time. I'm going to bring down the exposure so we can see the shoes and the highlights and the whites, because a lot of stuff is a little blown out. Bring up the shadows and the black point down. A little bit of color correction. There we go. So now we're getting our warm vibe. It has a little bit of a green tint in the shadows, but off of the preset that we've made, and I could use any of these other presets and it would still look just as good. It's kind of a matter of mood, which is why you would outline that with the client beforehand, because I could edit this 20 different ways. You know, all these color palettes kind of work. Like this preset that I have totally works. If we just picked up
Yeah.
the vibrance for it, looks great, like almost ready to ship. I could do a kind of like a purple mood if they're really trying to go off of the color of the shoes and really sell that. You know, I could really lean into it there. Or maybe we go for a dark feel and it's very mysterious and interesting and you get the glow of the logo. But that's why it's important to outline that before you start working, so you know the right direction you're working in and you're not wasting a lot of effort.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
this preset is a little bit of saturation adjustment, decreasing the yellows, increasing the greens, shifting the hues of the yellow and the greens as well, and then a lot of color grading once again. And I'm really relying on this tool for this shoot to kind of show a very professional, how you can get a very professional look in your images with just these simple tools. Because
Yeah.
without it, it loses a lot of the life.
Oh, well, this has been so informative. Thank you so much, Daniel, for being here with us today. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining us in the chat. It was great to have you here with us. We'll be back tomorrow at 9:30 a.m. Pacific for part 2 of commercial photo editing. And stick around for our special pick of the past Illustrator Daily Creative Challenge. And following that, we have a curated creative challenge. So join in for some branding and logo. And we will see you all tomorrow. Thank you so much and take care, Danielle, and bye, everyone.
Thanks, guys.